Hello and welcome to this video on one of the lesser known and seen elements of bonsai, power tools. There is a romanticized image of bonsai, tweezers, wire and patience. These are all true in moderation of course, but there are times, trees and more, where these simply do not apply. It is in these gaps that power tools come into play. Large branches, rough cleaning of trees and more all need something more powerful than nimble fingers, strong hands, and a will. Most commonly, you will use power tools to carve and clean up your bonsai. That is not the sole application, and you might have different ideas and applications of your own. When using the tools described, please follow proper usage directions and safety precautions. The appropriate personal protective equipment may be difficult to obtain at the moment, but do endeavour to source the appropriate kit. Either use under supervision or seek the advice of someone who is familiar with these tools. If not, things can go wrong. Let's start with a small and lightweight tool. The first we'll look at, a rotary tool, otherwise known as a Dremel tool. This can act in the form of a brush, abrasive, cutter and more. It is a relatively utilitarian tool. It lets you take out sections of a tree that are otherwise difficult to deal with using normal hand tools. For example, a brush cannot access this part of the tree very effectively, due to its depth, the narrowness of the break in the trunk, and more. You can, however, use something like a rotary tool to cut branches, but also to make gin and shari. The example in the background of this video uses an abrasive brush to remove areas that have previously been bleached with sulfur. These can then be polished and retreated with more sulfur to maintain the deadwood and bleach effect, thereby preserving the tree. The Dremel tool, as you can see, comes with a variety of wire attachments at the end. These can clean up and remove loose material. If it's a more substantial brush, you could also use it to begin removing the parts of the tree that are rotted or otherwise damaged. This is one of the particularly useful applications. Here it's simply wiping away loose matter, dust more or less, that has settled in there, that has not been washed away via rain or watering of the plant itself. Now, if we were to try and do this by hand, it would be far more difficult. In fact, you would need to use a very small, fine brush, possibly as little as a toothbrush. What we can then do, if we find that that's not working effectively, is go up a level to something more abrasive and aggressive. Here is just that. It's effectively sandpaper on the end of the tool. It's a combination of an abrasive, gritty substance and a number of glues to hold it together. It's then used to wipe away and grind at the surface. Much more useful if it's rough, damaged, or otherwise needs to have more material taken out. It's also convenient for smoothing of rough surfaces. Inside this part worked on now, it's relatively smooth, but if we had damage, either because of the rotting timber, damage to the tree itself, or more, we could use it to remove the rough coarseness. Sometimes this is desirable, sometimes it's not. You can see down the bottom here where we've now started to use an engraving component attached to the end of it. This is particularly useful if you're trying to remove small details or add in small details. For example, you could use it to create the margins of a gin or shari. You could use it, as we are here, to try and accentuate or expand upon gaps and joints. Or, much like with the abrasive compound, you can use it to try and smooth out and even up a rough surface. This is particularly effective for small amounts of damage or small variations in the height and level. The larger the difference is, the less suitable this particular fitting would be, but there are larger versions available that would achieve the same result on a grander scale. For this reason, tools like this are particularly useful. It doesn't take much, and they are relatively lightweight, which means if you're working on a tree that is small or large, you can easily move them around. For most of what we do with this video here, we have an attachment that goes onto the rotary tool and gives us a long length to work with, as it's an extension. It also reduces the size of the fitting at the end, which means we can access small and narrow spaces. Particularly useful, as you see now, for getting into the gap there where there is rotted out timber that, if we were to use hand tools such as carving knives, we would have difficulty accessing. Getting the right angle and position is impossible, but as long as we can get the end of the tool into that space, we can work with it. Barring that, you may want to look at using your rotary tool to cut. As you'll note here, it's not particularly ideal for small and supple branches. They bend under the pressure of the blade and it doesn't cut effectively. But that isn't the only application you might find. These sorts of attachments for the end of the tool are ideal for creating margins for your jin and shari, or to define boundaries. Simply cutting away like you see here allows us to clearly mark the edge of where we're trying to get into. That means if we're concerned about peeling away bark or similar later on, we can make sure that we don't damage sections that we do not want to damage. It allows us to clearly delineate what we're going to be doing and what we're not going to be doing. For example, right now we're marking the edge of where we want to remove bark from this part of the rose plant. Gradually we'll come back and we'll be able to remove more and more. But we can get in underneath it to an extent, lift it slightly, and that will then allow us to come back with pliers and remove parts of the bark and cambium. This is particularly useful for small plants like this, where you might have trouble applying the right pressure in the right way. In larger plants, you may want to use it to create an area to grip with the pliers, where you can get into the area better, create a more damaged region, which gives you better grip with the pliers to pull. Something small like this, it's simply convenient to have that clear separation on what you are and are not going to be removing. When we're looking at other material you can use this with, Deadwood is a good example. What you see here is a plant that hasn't survived, but that we've been looking at converting into Deadwood for either using in a landscape or possibly as a planting situation. Either way, it had to be bleached with lime sulfur, and now it needs to be cleaned up again, removing the excess sulfur. And you'll note as we go through that as we clean it, it creates a slight buffing appearance. It doesn't have to do much, it just has to remove the excess and help us to preserve the wood. So you can see the sheen here from where that's being worked in. It also means we maximize the longevity of this wood. Having removed the excess, we can also use it to clean away anything that we don't want to keep. Small spindly bits of the root structure there that we've had trouble removing by hand in the past can be quickly and efficiently dealt with now. You'll also note that the tool is not so powerful as to throw the piece of wood that we have there around. It means that if you're trying to do something with one hand, the rotary tool is ideal. It's small enough that you can handle it easily, but not so large that you can't control it. If you were to try and do this with something larger, or even a brush by hand, you might find that you need both hands free to work with it. Power tools in this case are an ideal enhancement for bonsai, especially for those who are handicapped. Trying to use the tool here like this, we're able to remove dirt and grime from the bottom of the tree that we've had trouble getting to in the past. It also ensures a more smooth finish, as the smaller roots that have been preserved will now break off freely. It's also used for cleaning up the tree in general. You'll see how easily it catches on to things like cobwebs, dust, and other things that get in the way that we don't want to hold on to. Even the small amounts of bark that are left over are quickly and effectively stripped from it. These can then be retreated to ensure the plant is preserved, or in this case, the deadwood is preserved, while all the while being easily handled. It maximizes the effectiveness but minimizes how hard we have to work. If you have been working hard on a plant in particular and you want to ensure that you minimize the damage to it, the juniper is a good case of that. For example, this here is a plant we purchased several years ago. The problems we face with it are simple but also difficult to address. For example, we need to use the brush here to remove damaged wood from the area where the trunk joins onto the roots. Gradually, we'll be able to make these roots into a single growth through time and effort, but for now, we need to avoid breaking them or damaging them to ensure the longest lifespan for this tree. In order to do that, we remove anything that's there initially that we've not treated with lime sulfur yet. Then we need to change over the bit that's on the end and look at trying to clean it up. Not just clean it up as in removing anything that's there that shouldn't be, but using the attachments to begin evening out the surface. This is done to remove the areas that have been damaged through wet, rot, and other similar effects, where we failed to use lime sulfur. It led to the splitting of parts of this, similar to how wood that's used for woodworking splits on the ends when it hasn't been sealed. The area we're working on here now was beginning to split and crackle, and as a result, we're trying to remove that damage so that it doesn't spread and proceed up the trunk, permanently weakening it. By doing this now, we'll do some damage to the tree, but will prevent the damage from spreading any further. You can use a tool like this to even out and smooth rough edges, not just on the whole, but to try and blend them in. So here we're removing the areas where it's cracked and split on a small level, so that those cracks and splits don't move up the trunk. The small size of the attachment makes this ideal. You can, as said previously, get larger bits to go on the end that allow you to take out more material at one time, but doing so has its drawbacks as you lose that fine degree of control. In order to ensure the maximum longevity of your trees and to avoid any possible damage, something like this is ideal, and as said earlier, you can use carving knives and similar hand tools if you want to stick to the more traditional puritanical approach to bonsai. However, there's an expression about working smart, not harder, and in this case, small amounts of work here now will ensure that we can maintain margins of where the bark is growing and eventually reseal the tree or ensure that our jin and shari show properly. But we can also do it quickly and efficiently, little bits at a time if we need to. The nature of the device is such that if you don't want to take out large sections of your tree immediately, you can take out small amounts, doing a little bit of work at a time and monitoring the tree's health, which is yet another advantage. The other being, and perhaps the more important of them, power tools like this rotary tool are more beginner friendly. You can make more mistakes and the tree won't be as badly damaged as if you were using carving knives. All of that is not to say that they are without problems. As you see here, this crassula, jade tree, or you happen to know the species, you'll see how much material it takes out almost immediately, and it's something to be aware of. A power tool doesn't have that fine degree of control. On the other hand, looking at this particular specimen, you can see how hard it is to get into some of those gaps, and again, using hand tools here wouldn't be viable. They would not be viable for a number of reasons, but most importantly is you simply can't get anything in there to access all the spaces you need to access. You can see how quickly we can remove rotted material from in there. This was a stump that we dug up several years ago now, and we're able to clean it out quickly and effectively now after giving it a while to recover. The process isn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it's quick and effective. The rotted wood inside can be taken out slowly but surely, starting little bit by little bit, and then we can proceed with a brush to try and remove the mess we've made that way, but it also serves a second purpose. the friction allows us to brush and rub and clear out the inside part of this. That means that we have a better image of what's going on inside, and you can see how quickly and easily it does that. Now, if we were to try and do this by hand, we may actually have to take the entire stump out, hose it down, and then replant it. Given how delicate it is at the moment, that's an undesirable approach, and this allows us to mitigate the need for that, to some extent. It is by no means a perfect answer, but it minimizes the possible harm we have to do to the tree and the ever-present risk of repotting. The rotary tool in this case is incredibly useful for that reason, and it allows us to clean it up quickly and effectively, taking away rotted material, carving it, and more. As we work through it, you'll see that different parts of the tree can be dealt with at the same time with the same attachment, allowing us to quickly and effectively work through it. One tool, many purposes. Even getting inside to that very narrow space in the middle is easily done due to the reach of the tool. Now, if we were to use knives or similar, we just could not do that, and we certainly could not remove the material as easily as we are here. The downside to doing it this way is that the attachments at the end should be considered a consumable item. That means that, much like wire, you should look to replace these on a regular basis. Now, unlike wire, they are not a single-use item, but they are a consumable, which means you will gradually wear them out, damage them, and then have to replace them. And, as with most power tools, they will also eventually break, so it does have a finite lifetime, but it is a useful tool nonetheless, and depending on the size of your collection, you might want to consider using it. Overall, the rotary tool is incredibly useful. Once you get used to using them, they can be very effective and make short work of things. Hopefully this has been of some help to you, and thank you for watching. If you have found it useful, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.